and welcome to today's Friday Facebook Live. I'm really excited about this one, actually, because we are talking about women in search. Now, any of you who kind of tune into my content regularly will know that women is a thing that I'm really passionate about, and search is a thing that I'm really passionate about. So today we're combining the two, and we're talking about women in search, and it's going to be great. I will let our two fabulous female guests introduce themselves in a minute, but doing a quick bit of Googling, we like to call it research, before we started the session today. And you know, you think sort of, oh, we live in a progressive society, we live in the 21st century, there's going to be loads of women in search, and there's going to be loads of women at the head of the search engine algorithms and stuff. But actually, Google still has fewer than 30% female employees. There is a massive thing called algorithmic bias, which we will come on and try and explain a little bit later on. There's also a massive disparity in the way women and men use search, in the way that we produce content for them, in the way that, you know, keywords even work, which again we will talk about. And obviously, as three women in a very male-dominated industry, our experiences are also one of the things that I would like us to very much talk about today, because it is all about the personal experience. So first of all, I will go around and let you introduce yourself. Anneka, what's your name and where do you come from?
I'm Anneka, originally from near Middlesbrough, if we're going into depth, but now Manchester-based. I am a digital marketing freelancer and specialising in paid search and paid social. Yeah, been in the industry for eight years now. So,
and you've braved it and going out on your own.
Yeah.
Now, well done to you. And Stacey, what's your name and where did you come from?
Stacey, from Oldham, just outside Manchester, and I'm also solo now, specialising in SEO and content marketing for a very small consultancy of 6, having spent previous 10 years before that working agency side in SEO.
Stacey, an agency of 6 is not very small. Do not put yourself down. You should be very proud of that. Yeah, oh no, I prefer small. Interesting though, isn't it, that I mean, I was just saying before we started the session, I've been working in GrowTraffic for probably about 7 or 8 years now. I always lose count. And I didn't know anything about SEO. I've come at it from a copywriting background and sort of learned SEO on the fly in a sort of crash course that I had to take about it. So I've come into it from quite a different way from everybody else. I was saying I haven't worked in the corporate world. I haven't worked for kind of big central Manchester or London agencies or anything. But a lot of the women that I know who are in search have started off there and have since set out on their own. And a lot of them are now either running their own agencies or working by themselves on a freelance basis. So, I mean, we'll come on to discuss this, but I do wonder if there's something in that women feel the need to or have to kind of set out on their own. So, yeah, anyway, okay. So, first question I have for you, and Anneka, I'm going to come to you again first. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose search, or did search choose you?
It chose me. Well, I don't think it chose me. It was an accident, completely fell into it. Background, my degree is in marketing, but it always kind of thought to go way back, went into marketing because I thought I wanted to go into PR because that's what Samantha on Sex and the City did, and so yeah, I wanted to be in marketing, but like definitely more the kind of creative side. I mean, when I was back at uni quite a long time ago now, we didn't even learn about digital. I didn't even know PPC existed. It wasn't a part of marketing. Long story short, had a couple of jobs in kind of general marketing, then packed it all in, went off traveling, came back, was desperate for a job. And as you kind of ask anyone if anyone's got anything, and a guy that I actually went to primary school and secondary school with worked at an agency, phoned me up out of the blue and said, send me your CV, and put it in front of his then boss, who was the head of PPC, with the recommendation of, she doesn't know anything about PPC, but she's really smart, and I used to copy my homework off her at school. And that was it. She'll learn it, pick it up. And that's it. So like age 26, went in at grad level on no money and started at the very bottom in PPC, and then obviously the rest is history. But
that's really interesting though. So have you, because I know that's what you do now, isn't it? You really focus on paid search and paid social, and that's your niche. So have you always been in that paid area for all your life? Yeah,
so specialized in that, and then went in-house in PPC, just PPC, built the team in-house, brought in from an agency, and then I went back into a wider role of head of marketing. But I think by that point you're so performance based. You know, I was very, very different to a head of marketing who has come from a content background, or I looked at everything from a results, which is why I was put into that role. Yeah, so I think, you know, PPC got me at that point.
Yeah, I think I just want to clarify for anyone who's not SEO PPC search specialists, that search is the whole general thing of sort of getting businesses online and getting them found and growing your online profile and stuff. But within that, there are all of these little niches, and everybody has their little terms. So PPC is the paid side of it, basically getting yourself in the adverts at the top. SEO tends to be the on-site stuff where you're kind of tweaking with your back end and your keywords and your meta descriptions. Then there's the content marketing, which is the blogging and the producing content and stuff. So all of these are really kind of quite detailed disciplines in themselves, but it does all generally come under search. But this is why we might also talk about kind of paid and organic, and they're the two streams. But I was saying to somebody the other day, they were like, well, what, you know, where do you sit in a business? And I said, you know, SEO search marketing, it sits between your IT people and your marketing people. We're kind of that middle ground. So we're going to faff around with your website, and we're going to do some twiddly bits, and we might create some landing pages and stuff, but then we're going to bring that marketing bit together, and it's kind of melding those two things. So yeah, lots of what's the jargon might come up, but we'll try and simplify it. So Stacey, what about you? Did you always want to do search from being a little girl, or did it accidentally?
No. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a nun, because my Catholic primary school, well, the nun just used to come in, and it's like everyone had to behave, and she got biscuits. So I was like, it's a pretty good job. But yeah, no, that wasn't to be. So I wanted to do screenwriting or creative writing, and I was freelance copywriting early on, and I was getting asked about SEO more and more. I started to self-teach, thought there's quite a lot here. So I went and took a trainee role with an agency in Manchester, figuring, I think I probably thought I'd do a couple of years and then go freelance again. But I was there for 10 years in the end. So I quite like the competitive nature of it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You've come at it from the same way. I know you've been on the session before, we've talked about this, but you've come at it from the same side of me as we were copywriters first, because a lot of people who come into SEO, and I think this is quite an important distinction to make, a lot of the male people that come into SEO, they come into it from the techie side. So they might be web developers who suddenly started going into that, maybe marketers who've started going into the SEO side of things, but they tend to have a much more sort of technical background first, and then they bring the marketing and pile that on top. Whereas the women I know, and I'm going to make massive sweeping generalizations here, the women I know tend to come at it much more from a, you know, from the content side, and the how does our message need to be put across on the internet? How are we going to get that through? And then the kind of technical side of it comes underneath that. And I think that's one interest for me. I don't know, Anneka, are you, because you've already said you are really results and kind of process driven. Would you say still, how do you come at it? Systems or language?
I mean, systems probably, but I don't think I really kind of knew that until I got into it. Like I said, at uni doing marketing, you know, I kind of always thought I would be this like fluffy marketer, and I don't think until I actually got into PPC, and I think it's just that thing of like having a job and working more, that you realize that, you know, I'm all about the numbers, the spreadsheets, like what's working over the, you know, even this, like now writing ad copy is my least favorite part of PPC. I enjoy it, it's not, but give me a spreadsheet of results and looking where I can make changes to bids is great. So yeah, I think I kind of learned that about myself or I've done it.
I think though as well, you know, that I have a similar thing, because as I say, I started as a copywriter, so I was writing blogs, I was writing on-page content, I was writing product descriptions, and I sort of started being pulled into SEO more and more, and that's how I kind of came into GrowTraffic that way. But once I started doing, like I say, I loved the writing, I loved all that kind of that side of it. But once I started doing audits and looking at, you know, really analysing a website page by page and saying, you know, where are people dropping off? How long are they spending? What is this bit of content here doing to people? Is it turning them on or turning them off? Where are they going? How is this website working? And what are the keywords and all the rest of it? I really enjoy doing audits. I don't know whether I really enjoy doing audits because I get like 3 or 4 hours to just sit down and focus on something, and I don't have to make anyone's tea. So that might be one of the reasons that I like doing audits. But you know, once I started doing it, I enjoyed that technical side. Which bit do you like best, Stacey?
For me, I quite like the results analysis side of things. So I'm messing around with, obviously, SEO and the link building, the creative stuff's quite fun. But actually, when you take a site and you go right back to basics and you go back to keyword strategy and you start just even little things. We had a client a couple of weeks ago, and it was like, okay, we're going to start by just redoing all these page titles manually across 600 pages. It seems like a lot, but actually there's something to do here. And it's literally 72 hours until you start seeing significant changes in organic traffic and converting traffic. And then tweaking with click-through rates and things. So I guess much like with ad copy, page titles and meta descriptions and the impact on click-through. So if we've got a client who's already performing really well from organic, it's like, I'm going to make some changes to your meta description, page title, and we're going to see if we can actually get more traffic from the ranking that we've already obtained. That sort of stuff's a lot of fun. And I think here we tend to like, who's your biggest competitor that you want to beat tends to be the first question. It's not always the one at number one. Sometimes it's someone a client's got personal beef with. But the feeling then of beating somebody is quite a lot of fun, like in SEO terms. So I enjoy that side of it a lot.
I do think that is as well one of the biggest wins and biggest drawbacks with SEO, because on the one hand, you know, it's really hard to say to some, you know, a client will come to you and they'll say, right, I want 5 new enquiries, or I want 5 new customers, do some SEO, and yeah, I can't prove to you that what I have done here will result in that. But by the same token, you can really get that really quite meta, to you know, to use another term, and be like, right, we want bounce rate to come down by X%. We want the number of pages people are looking at to go up by 1. And if you bring it down to that, then those things really are measurable, and you can directly say, you know, well, we've done this. We've been doing this activity for 3 months, and now look, these are the keywords we're tracking. This is where they are, and you get a really nice graph that goes up. So in one sense, it is really measurable, and that's really quite rewarding, isn't it? But then obviously there's the massive thing of, well, I wanted 10 new clients. How do you know what you've done has made that?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of always a bit of a limitation with SEO. It's obviously we've got not provided, so we don't get all the keyword data through. You can link Search Console in and make some reasonable guesses, reasonably educated estimates. But I think the side of SEO that I probably enjoy the most is where actually we're targeting traffic, relevant traffic through to commercial landing page. And yeah, we can measure sales or we can measure inquiries. That stuff is so much easier to deal with than, you know, even the link building side of it. Not all of our clients get fully why we need to do the link building. So while we might high five in-house about 50 links to a great piece of content, finance director actually doesn't give a shit. You know, it's more like, how many leads did that drive? So it's tying that back into the rankings and then tying it back into the results afterwards. So I think, there's SEO's kind of got the real hard results side and then the quite fluffy side. And the fluffy side's quite frustrating to communicate.
It really, I mean, we had this with a client, I think it was last month, and they were like, well, what have you done? You know, my business hasn't massively grown. And we were like, what do you mean, what have we done? Like, look at all these links and look at all these keyword ranking. You know, look at it, it's miles better. But, you know, unless that actually translates through to something tangible on their bottom line, they don't see the value in it, do they? And that's the kind of hard sell. Okay, I don't want us to kind of go too far down moaning about clients, basically, because we can spend all afternoon. But so you know, women in search. I have 2 questions now I'm going to ask you, and Anneka, I'm going to come to you again first. First of all, have you often found that you have been one of the few women around? And secondly, have you encountered sexism off the back of that, do you think?
So being the few women around, so when I joined that agency at the very beginning, joined a PPC team of 20 people, and I was the third female to go into that office. Yeah, I mean, it changed whilst I was there. I mean, most new recruits actually ended up being female, and I've got friends at the same agency now, and I think it's about a 50-50 split. So things are changing, but yeah, that was the situation, and it didn't scare me, it didn't bother me, but it was always there. You know, you always knew that. I'm okay working in a very male kind of situation. It didn't bother me. It was very, very laddie as well, which again, for a lot of females, and again, that did change whilst I was there, because you also have to look at the average age of people in digital. It's not just the gender. You are looking at, you know, I was going into a room where the average age was 20. Well, no, I was one of the eldest at 26. So you're looking at early 20s lads.
Yeah.
And for some people, you know, of the 3 girls that were there, 2 of us were fine. One was so quiet, never spoke. Like literally in the 2 years I was there, I think I had 3 conversations with her. And I think it was just not her scene. And it was quite sad. But yeah, so that didn't bother me. But yeah, that was completely the situation. In terms of sexism in search, not anything that I could kind of pinpoint. There's never been a moment in kind of the search industry where I've said, that is because I'm a female, that's happened. I went from the agency into the corporate world, and there's been a lot more stuff in the wider corporate world that I could pinpoint, but not put down to actual search.
Have you, though, you know, there's, well, you've just said it, you know, being in the corporate world and being in that sort of office environment and stuff, there is still a lot of sexism around that, isn't there? I know as well. I mean, Hannah always laughs at me because every session I'm in, she's like, oh, I used to work in a garage, and I worked in a garage in Wigan with a load of male mechanics, and that was like a baptism of fire for me of going into the workplace. And you know, after you've done that, when you've worked with a load of teenage lads who were just teenage lads, you know, you can kind of walk into any situation, so it doesn't intimidate me. But for that girl that you've mentioned, Anneka, you know, if you are just a quiet person and you don't want to be in that environment that's constantly raucous, that has got to be intimidating, hasn't it?
Definitely. And I think, you know, it depends what you're like as an individual. I'm from the northeast of England. I'm like, you know, I've uphold most of those stereotypes. I'm used to that kind of, whereas if you're not, it is difficult. And, you know, it was a very boozy, like, you know, media Thursdays are a big thing and everyone out partying all the time. And it's just a very, very different world. But yeah, we'd make jokes of it, and it would be a kind of topic of joke a lot, but I don't feel like it actually kind of impacted me. But then it's interesting because then to go into the corporate world, it's a different side of it, more that kind of being surrounded by men and the men in charge. I think that's probably it, isn't it? It's these big layers of white men in charge that you go into a room and you can try and hold your own, but you're always looked at as the young girl in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the token girl coming along.
I kind of didn't have that. Actually, kind of agency side, I didn't have that.
Yeah.
Even though there were less women.
Yeah. Okay. Stacey, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, when I joined an agency in Manchester, I was the second female, and it was quite a small agency at the time. And for actually a couple of years, I was the only person on the SEO side of things who was female, which didn't bother me in the slightest, to be honest. I think everybody was fairly, again, I'm quite, you know, okay with loud and rowdy. It doesn't really bother me in the slightest. Again, it was very, very young agency. And then over time, we sort of had more women come in, but it took probably a few years, I'd say, really. I mean, and even as recently as last November, I spoke at a conference in Thailand where I was the only female speaker on the schedule. And to their credit, they're really trying, like really trying to get more women to speak there. They've had, there's difficulty, I suppose, in finding the right kind of women. I think a lot of women in search are working on creative side of things, and they wanted someone to talk about something that kind of spans a bit black hat and a bit white hat, and talk about where the line is drawn. But yeah, even as recently as last year, there weren't that many female attendees, and I was the only female speaker. Didn't encounter any real sexism there. The only time I've really encountered it actually is with clients outside of search or at non-search conferences. So I was at a gambling conference with one of the sales guys when I was agency side, and there was a poker tournament at the end of the evening. So I was like, yeah, great, sit down to this poker tournament. And some chap came over and just said, just so you know, the wives and girlfriends are through in the bar having cocktails. Like, well, if you're offering to bring me one, that'd be great. Like, for real. And there's things like that. There's been in corporate firms where I've gone in to present stuff and been called sweetheart and darling, or someone doesn't listen to your comment and they just, oh, okay, sweetheart. Then they'll talk to the male salesperson to ask the question that he's not qualified to answer, but I can. So you get a bit of that. But I think I was kind of naive coming in. I was like, sexism isn't something I need to worry about in the UK, really. And I think for me, I've only really paid a great deal of attention to how much your gender can affect your progress in any industry, I suppose, since having children. I think that was really the point at which I've really noticed it. But on the whole, it certainly hasn't affected my career progression.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because when I think about, the women that I know in search, and there are not a lot of them, I know quite a lot more men, or I know of as well. But the women I know that are in search, and I've banded them all together. As soon as I find one, I'm like, you can join my club. Come with me. Let's all do it together. But the ones I know, they are all quite laddie, and they are all quite, I don't know any who would not be able to walk into any kind of environment and hold their own. And I do think that is an important fact that we need to remember. We have all gone into a male dominated industry, but we are all fairly confident women. We could walk into a room and we know we would, as I say, be able to compete. We would be, I'd be able to drink, I'd be able to smoke, I'd be able to eat and do all the things that I would need to do in order to survive in that environment. But I do wonder if people who are more shy or perhaps not as self-confident, maybe they just don't come into this industry to begin with because they think, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to go to that. I want to go somewhere where it's really nice and fluffy. So I'm going to go into graphic design where there are loads of women and we can all, have Prosecco parties and go on hot tub weekends and stuff like that. So maybe it is self-selecting and we're just not realizing it.
I think what we see is the senior positions where it's a particular problem. I think I'm seeing more women now coming in, particularly on outreach and the creative link building side of things, and on content as well. Quite a lot of women coming in. There's a great community that Arij runs, Women in Tech SEO, where there's quite a lot of technical SEO women in there as well. But I think the biggest limitation still appears to be progression. So all the recent surveys that come out will sort of say, well, first of all, women aren't paid as much, even in those senior roles. And actually getting to those senior roles still seems to be more of a challenge. So I guess the women that we hear from are probably all fairly confident and comfortable holding their own. The ones that you tend to hear about are largely in more senior positions. But I think there's probably still a problem that we're not necessarily realizing the full extent of, with maybe less confident might correlate with more junior, less experienced, so less confident speaking up. And we know that confidence issues tend to affect women more than men. And I guess, there's a nature, I think, in a lot of places that I've worked where, I've been in to see clients where it's the person who speaks loudest who's likeliest to get that promotion or likeliest to get noticed. And I think that's where there's still an issue in search and probably everywhere else as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the issues are wider. I think, a lot of, like everything you've just said, it's a wider issue across all jobs. It's that, being talked over in meetings, and it's across all industries. And like you say, that does massively affect girls. Well, it affects everyone, but like girls in particular. So then if you know that it's an industry that's all men, you don't want to put yourself in that situation because that's been your experience. I mean, in terms of we know it's a big issue, but, you know, when I was recruiting for a PPC role at my last corporate job, we'd get 10, 20 CVs through and not one would be female. If I put a job advert out for a marketing assistant or marketing exec, just like a general role, it'd be 80% females.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's crazy the difference that is still there. Like I said, a lot of agencies and stuff are now a lot more equal. But I think people obviously are choosing to go to the agencies and the corporate jobs, particularly when they're earlier in their career.
You made a good point before, though, as well, and that's one thing I do want to come back to, because I think how we advertise jobs is particularly crucial to whether or not we get more women and girls in. So I'm going to come back to that when we answer what are we going to do about it. But yeah, you said before there's three things I want to pick out on there. First of all, the kind of naivety in terms of going into the workplace and not expecting. I was exactly the same. I was raised by a fairly feminist mother and a fairly feminist father, and until I entered the workplace, I didn't realize that you know, sexism still existed. I thought all the problems had been solved at Greenham Common in the 70s, and now we were all fine and I could do whatever I wanted to do, because that's what I'd always been told. And that, you know, going into meetings and being talked over and being ignored. And I've been in meetings where you say something and then a man will say, what I think we should do is this, and you're like, I literally just said that. That's exactly what I just fucking said, you know, and that happens so often, and you know, with clients, with people that you work with, and you're absolutely right. It's not just about search. This is kind of sexism in the workplace. But what I do wonder off the back of that, and you said, Stacey, you know, it's that progression, and I said it at the beginning as well. You know, is the fact that women will get so far in search and then they will leave and start their own agency or go freelance. And that's why we're not getting the progression through to the kind of really senior roles. Do you think that's the thing that's happening?
Could be, yeah. I think, you know, and still even today, but I mean, my husband's very hands-on. We've got 3 children, and the youngest is 4 months. And he's very hands-on. So, I mean, I went back to work after 6 weeks with the first one, which in hindsight was too soon. But because the burden in most cases of childcare is still going to fall on women, there's still an element in searches with everybody where actually, I don't know how people feasibly manage to have children at school and operate a full-time job when they don't work for themselves. Like 9 a.m. till 3 p.m. does not constitute a full day of school. And trying to have children around a full-time job for somebody else is certainly one of the drivers for me going solo, so I could build my work around my family life. So I think that's going to play a huge part of why people will eventually go solo. And yeah, I think if you're in an environment where you're not comfortable, either because the work you're doing isn't comfortable or because you don't like, if you're quiet, you don't like the loud environments, you don't like the fact that you are one of only a handful of women, perhaps you don't like being talked over. If you're in that environment, then yeah, you probably leave, maybe go somewhere else or go freelance. So yeah, I think that's definitely plays a part.
I think as well, like we said before, due to kind of the age of a lot of people, you know, we're in an industry that didn't exist. So you don't have 30 years of evidence of, well, this company's got a really good maternity policy and they do this and that, because it just didn't. Like, again, when I joined that agency, in the digital department, there was not a female who'd had a child. Like, it wasn't in my mind at the time. It didn't bother me. But there certainly wasn't, if I was going to think about having a child, there wasn't someone to go, right, well, she took 9 months off, came back at the exact same level. It just wasn't there. You can't, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I don't have children, but I couldn't tell you what that agency have done with. There are people since that I know have had kids, so I'm sure they figured it out. But we kind of joke a little bit amongst ourselves, and they're going to have to write a maternity policy when someone gets pregnant because it just didn't exist.
I'll tell you what, one of the kind of things that it wasn't a motivating factor for me, but it is certainly the reason why I could never go back and work for somebody else now. And that is just that I don't feel like I should have to prove myself to, you know, like when I was working at the NHS, for example, a lot of the people higher up from me were men. There were, you know, we worked with the mental health team and everything. So the nurses, all the nurses were female, all the caring staff, all the OTs, all the physiotherapists, all women. But you go a couple of layers up and they are all men at the management level. And I was, you know, I got fed up of having to prove that I could do my job and that I had a brain. And there was just this constant, like I say, sort of doubting of, you know, oh, I'm not sure. Whereas now I don't need to prove to anybody that I can do my job because I can just get on and do it. And I do think that's a big part for me of not being doubted and being able to say, you know, I think this is a good idea. Let's give it a try. And I'm fairly confident that I can pull it off. And then I do. And that's all right. And I don't have to keep, you know, having men above me who are not as good at the job as I am telling me what I can and can't do.
Yeah, that's it. I think, like you said, that is why so many females are getting out. And whether that's the right thing or not, you know, we're not really fighting it in the places that the issues are happening. We're just taking ourselves out and going, do you know what, I'm better off doing this on my own.
And I do think that's got to be a problem for, you know, the next level coming up, hasn't it? Like you say, if they haven't seen women with children or women having to negotiate childcare or take maternity leave, if they're not seeing that of the women at the senior level, because women just, you know, reach 30 and get out, then, you know, we're not really changing anything, are we?
Yeah, but I think that's a worry. Certainly for the agency that I joined, literally everybody was early 20s, pretty much fresh out of uni. Nobody had the two founders, men, both had children, but none of the staff had children. And I was the first person for whom maternity was even a consideration. And as I said, the first time it was really short, and I just kind of slotted back in after 6 weeks. I took longer with the second one, and it was actually at that point then that I was like, I actually don't want to go back. I don't want to commute long hours. I don't want to work. I think the difference, do it for yourself as well. It's like, if I take an extra piece of work on over and above what I planned for the month now, at the end of it, there's a direct benefit for me. So if you take something big and extra on and people are pulling a bit of extra weight here and there, there's bonuses for everybody. There's bonuses for me at the end of it. It's like another weekend away with the kids. When I was working for somebody else, it's like if something extra came in over and above and I was already at capacity, it's like, I'm going to spend the next 2 days working evenings, having not got in until 7, 8 o'clock at night. And literally the impact for me at the end of the month is diddly squat. Like there's nothing for me and my family out of this. So I think that's another one of the drivers for me, really. But I couldn't make working in an agency work with a family for me. I couldn't make it balance.
I do want us to move on because there's so much that we need to talk about here. But I know when, you know, the last job that Dali was at, I recognise he's not a female, but he did have a female boss. But she had scheduled the kind of SEO review meeting for the previous week every Monday morning. Well, in order for him to get the statistics off Google Analytics for the full week, he had to do that on a Sunday evening. So, and Sunday evening is our family film night. So for the entire time that he was working at that job, family film night, he wasn't there for. There was just me and Leon and the dog sat on our own. And it is decisions like that, isn't it? You know, if there aren't people with children, and particularly women, but even men with children in the workplace, little decisions like that of when you schedule a certain meeting just don't enter people's heads, and you know, and the impact then on family life. And it's exactly that, Stacey. You know, you're then expected to work in the evenings to get a project finished. Well, how does that impact on your kids? And you know, with a job, that's, you know, you've got another 40 working years, haven't you? But with your kids, you only get to do that once, and that's it. And you know, it is important that people with children and working lives and stuff are in the workplace so that we can make these important decisions. Okay, I do want us to move on. So quickly, I want to talk about sexism, not just that we've encountered in the workplace, but I would like us to come on to sexism in algorithms. Nobody grown. It's actually really interesting. And also sexism in kind of Google. So bringing it out of our working lives and onto interweb. You know, if Google only has fewer than 30% of its employees that are women, that means that, and they're not, since Sheryl Sandberg left and she went to Facebook, there's very few women in the actual kind of top level seats at Google. And Bing's the same, actually. But you know, how does that impact how algorithms are made? How does that impact how the decisions are made? And then also there's a thing about algorithmic bias, which, just to kind of quickly explain what that is I mean, the argument is that actually the algorithms aren't biased. It's just the people who use them are biased. The algorithms are only as good as the information that we put in, and because society is sexist and society is slightly racist, the things that the algorithms put out are the same. But you know, if you put in women or girls into a Google search engine, what you will be faced with are screens, you know, reams and reams of photos of young, thin, beautiful girls, primarily white, primarily long blonde hair. You know, the kind of the skewing of how the algorithms and the information that we're given is really quite stark when you start to look at it. So what do either of you think? Stacey, I'll come to you first this time. What do you think about algorithmic bias?
Do you know, you look at things like Google Suggest, and I was just having a nose this morning, it's still the case. If you do type woman into Google and go to images, the suggestions for other things that you might want to see is most beautiful, pregnant, beautiful, blonde hair. With men, it's like suit, success. It's like, you know, it is down to users and their previous search activity. There is a question over whether companies like Google have got a responsibility to start interfering there, actually. And for some of these queries that are, you know, that kind of promote discrimination against women or discrimination against ethnic minorities or Black people, whether at that point Google should be interfering. And in a bid to say, actually, we don't want to encourage women to be perceived as children makers and things of beauty, like whether Google should be making changes there. And I don't know where I sit on that, to be honest. I'm not sure whether Google should be interfering or not.
I really struggle with this. This is, I would like us to talk about this, actually, because this is one of the things, and it's the same with Facebook, you know, Twitter, all of these, anything that relies on an algorithm, we expect them to moderate humanity and the outcome. We're all saying to Twitter, you know, well, women get death threats whenever they put a tweet out. Why don't you do something about it? But the upshot is that we are then putting power into the hands of a, you know, Twitter or Google or whatever, to moderate what we see and to determine what is acceptable and what is not. And they are not people who are voted in. They are, you know, massive corporations who have an interest in money. So, you know, how do we then reconcile those two things? They're really tricky, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I don't think I'd really want to see Google going in and changing suggested searches on the basis of the fact that the suggested searches are inherently sexist, because I think it just opens that can of worms. I think the problem actually stems with society, and that's obviously a much harder thing to change. But yeah, I mean, as an absolute result of what people type in and patterns over years and years and years, you know, what we see in Google will often be skewed in the favour of white people and men.
Yeah, absolutely. Anneka, what do you think?
Well, I think you have to go back further into the offices of Google, and again, it's that thing of who are writing these algorithms, who are working on them, and there just aren't women there. And see all these stories about, I don't know if it was Alexa or one of the first like voice activated searchers when it was first released, didn't understand a female voice because it had been built in a team of all men. And that's not even men you know, they're not making that consciously and saying, we're not going to make her understand women. It's just, she's not in the room. If we're not in the room at the beginning with all these things, we end up so far down the line where we just have to accept it as well. And, you know, it is down to what people put in. But when you make that initial search, the person that's worked on that search algorithm just isn't. There is no one there who's gone, hang on, that's a screen of white men. Like, they go, yeah, that looks like what we would expect it to look like because that's what we look like.
That's what we look like. It is, yeah, and absolutely. This is the point, isn't it? That, you know, an algorithm is a computer or it's a mathematical equation, whichever way you want to look at it. it has no inherent sexism. It has no inherent bias whatsoever. It is purely a result of the people who are using it. But you're absolutely right. How do we change that? It's funny because I'm in a group on Facebook. It's called Women in SEO. I think I have invited both of you to be in it. So I don't know whether you are. But they have a set of rules, and Facebook groups, they all have rules, don't they? And nobody ever adheres to them. But this group have particularly worked really hard at removing any negativity. Anybody who first of all, you're not allowed to begin a post with "I'm sorry, I don't know this, but," so you have to stop apologizing and just ask your question. And secondly, anybody that has any kind of negative response, passive aggressive response, even like, "How are you so stupid that you don't understand backlinks?" That was just stopped. And the woman who found it did a video where she was talking about how long it took them to do this and how long it took them to train people. But it is actually a really nice group to belong in. You go in there and you can ask a question, and people are really lovely and they support each other. And so I like it. I really like that environment. But I keep coming back to the point of, that's not the role of an adjudicator, of Google, of Facebook, of Twitter to make those decisions. This has to be a societal thing. And how do we change society's way of behaving if there isn't an adjudicator first? It's completely chicken and egg, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's tricky. I mean, it happens in everything. It's like there's a book called Invisible Women, which is infuriating, about all the things actually that, like, doctors misdiagnosing women having heart attacks because the symptoms are different. We've only ever studied heart attack symptoms historically in men, or seatbelts that are designed for a male form. So actually women are likelier to die in a serious accident than men. I think in everything, in search and everything else, it comes down to who's involved in designing this thing. So I think actually a lot of changes in society probably brought about education early on, stopping encouraging girls to play with dollies and cook things while boys build rockets and change the world. There's an element of that to it, but also I think across every single sector, getting that gender balance in senior roles within every single type of company is probably the only way that we stop having a world that's designed for men.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But we are then back to we've got to stay in search. We've got to stay. We can't leave and start our own agencies and go freelance. We've got to stay there and pave the way for the future generations, else nothing will change. Unless
we build the agencies that actually become the agencies that change that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I like that plan. That's all right. I want to quickly, whilst we're on that though, I want to return to something that you said earlier, Stacey, and it was about women seeing women. There's this whole thing of you've got to see women at the top in order to believe that you can go and do that. And there are now black girls who have seen Michelle Obama that are going to strive for that, although they've seen her be somebody's wife, but she's amazing and I'm not taking that away from her. But you're absolutely right. In terms of being vocal, it has to be those brave women, those loud women, those women that are comfortable of going and standing on a stage in front of 2,000 people and doing a TED talk or speaking at a conference. And that's what we need, isn't it? We need women who are fairly confident enough to do that at the moment, to start speaking out, go and seek positions on panels and go and ask if you can speak at a conference and go and ask if you can write an article about something and become visible, because that's perhaps the only way we're going to change things.
Yeah, mentoring programs.
Even before we started this talk today, and Rachel, you said, "Oh, do you know Stacey?" And I was like, "I know the name, definitely." And when it came down to it, I've seen Stacey talk at a conference, and because you see so few women, you remember those names. I don't remember the names of 90% of men that I've seen talk at conferences because there's just so many of them. And I think you're right that getting people out there, getting women on the panels, it's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah, a lot of conferences do a great job. You look at Kelvin at Brighton, you look at MozCon, even I spoke at MozCon in 2014, and even then, like before the real conversation started happening, they were really conscious of having balanced panels. But there's still a ton of events where that's not the case. But even private mentoring programs, Arij ran the Women in Tech SEO mentoring program. So I did 8 weeks speaking to someone kind of early on in a career. And all the questions that come up are, you know, it's about soft skills and confidence. Actually, confidence comes up over and over again. And I think that if you can get more, even if it's not necessarily someone standing on a stage and being really verbal, if you can get women who've sort of got themselves into senior positions available for off the record private conversations out of an office full of people with the people who want to do it, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's really what you said there as well, because I was just thinking then I attended, I think it was right at the start of lockdown, and it was a search SEO conference that I was supposed to be at, and obviously they put it online and streamed it there instead, and there were probably 50, like I said, they worked really hard, so there were a representative amount of women on there, but the ones that the sessions that I listened to by women were really, really meaty, and I came away kind of thinking I've learned something out of that. I've got something, and the ones that were there by men were not. There was some wishy-washy ideas and some vague kind of takeaways, and it brought me back to that point of, again, to be a man and to be able to speak at a conference, you just have to be a man and be working in a fairly senior role, and they will put on a presentation or a talk that's got 3 or 4 takeaway points, whereas a woman that you are gonna, it's that combating imposter syndrome thing, isn't it? They're gonna be like, right, I am gonna pack everything I know into this talk and I'm gonna wow everybody, and they were so much better. But again, and Hannah said in the chat before we started this thing, we do need to talk about imposter syndrome, but that kind of there are these two sides, aren't there? There's almost, we've got to teach women and teach women about SEO and let them do that job, but we've also got to coach them to say, no, you've got to be brave enough, you can do it, stand up, be counted, and there's always that twofold thing, isn't there?
Well, even just taking these Facebook Lives in. So this is the second one I've done. And the first one where I was absolutely terrified. And obviously, Richie, we were joking. I'm like, can't guarantee I won't have a glass of wine beforehand. Like, it was the scariest thing in the world, the idea of coming on and doing this. Now, one down, this one, I'm way more confident, way more comfortable. But that's it. It's, I kind of, even as an individual, I talk the talk, but if you said, right, we want you to get on a stage and tell everyone about PPC, I would crawl in a ball and hide away.
It is really because,
I love it.
And that's the thing, it's having the confidence in it. I used to be the same before I was doing anything. I would like rehearse it and research it. And it took me a good few years to convince myself that actually, no, do you know what? I know how to do my job. I know what I'm talking about. I am perfectly capable of going anywhere and sitting down and talking about it. And it is, but it's only by doing this that you learn about yourself and you give yourself the confidence to do it. So offering women the space to talk about this stuff and to prove to themselves and that that's just as important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think how career progression works as well, because in most industries, most organizations, like, progression is about management. Like, that's the only way you progress. You progress by, you're wicked at SEO, you're brilliant at SEO, so now you're an SEO manager, so you'll do less SEO and more of managing other people who do it in a way that you might not want them to do it. And actually, people who are really, really great at SEO aren't necessarily great people managers. And I think that actually a lot of women I've worked with and come across the industry, like, actually, I'm just not keen on the idea of managing people. Whereas you get some companies, I think Moz did it. I believe the search might have a pathway as well, where there's career pathways where you can progress without management. So, like, individual contributor, or progressing in ways where actually you're maybe coming up with new strategies, testing things that roll out to the rest of the team, so you can create that value for the company that warrants the progression without becoming a manager. Actually, I think if you struggle with confidence anyway, management's quite a scary prospect.
And also, everything in it is a discipline in itself these days. Managing people and being able to do HR and all the rest of it, that is a discipline. And you're absolutely right. You learn your discipline. You learn how to do your job. You don't learn how to do that because that's somebody else's job. Yeah. So we absolutely should have and is this something that we need to look at in the way that all agencies and companies and businesses are structured, in that we just say, let's split this out, and let's have people management is down to one specific person. We have an HR person and they manage the people, and then we have other people who, you know, do the actual job and the strategy and make sure everything's in place that everybody else implements. Because you're absolutely right, it's a bonkers way. The only way you can progress is by suddenly becoming a touchy-feely manager, and that's just not what some people are good at.
And for people who are not interested, I mean, even my husband is, you know, looking at job roles where he's gonna end up being forced down the route of managing a team, and he doesn't want to manage a team. He wants to be good at his job.
Yeah, it is. Time is marching away from us, and as ever, there is so much that we haven't even touched upon yet. So, one of the things that I wanted to ask, there's two questions that I always ask, so I'll save those till the end. But how do we get more women in search? So, Anneka, you mentioned before about, and I know, you know, everything we've been talking about is how do we get more women in search, but in the immediate kind of short term, you said before, Anneka, about job descriptions really matter. You know, does how do we and obviously there's the whole thing now about, you know, blind CVs, so you don't put your age on, you don't put your gender on, and you just apply for things. Is that one main way? Or does it start earlier? Do we need to get at girls when they're in college and uni? I don't know what to think.
I think both of those things. I think one thing immediately is, I think a lot of girls are put off search because they think of it as being very techy. Which there is a technical side to it. There is a very data side of it, and I think a lot of girls think that's not for me. But like you said, there's a different side to it as well. There's the content side. There's the creative side. So almost changing where you're looking for candidates as well, not necessarily going down that one route of, you know, the amount of job adverts you see out there that say you must have a marketing degree or you must have X amount of years experience in marketing. Like I said, like I went into it with a marketing degree but no experience. You know, some of the best people I've worked with have got science degrees or an English degree. Like they've got, you don't necessarily need those skills on paper. That doesn't get the best person. And also starting younger. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's across the board. It's all different industries, but teaching those 3- and 4-year-old girls that they don't need to be a hairdresser or a nurse. Or, not that there's anything wrong with those roles, but they can do anything.
Yes.
And I think, you know, that is the biggest impact we can have. Still in schools now, you know, there's girls in secondary schools who are the only girl in the IT class. I was the only girl in my IT class 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's still the same. And it's why are girls not choosing those subjects? So I think starting as young as possible, and yeah, just changing where you're looking for candidates, not just kind of throw that net out.
I agree with everything you said there. And what I also think is, again, this kind of comes down to us is, you know, talk about the different things, because what we said right at the very beginning of this session is that we each found a thing out of it that we really enjoy, regardless of what direction we come into it. And you're absolutely right. We give off, you know, there's this impression that SEO is really technical, PPC is really technical, and it isn't. It's a real blend of a lot of different kind of skill sets and being able to think about different ideas. And it's finding those, it's getting across that it's those transferable skills. You're absolutely right. You know, I've got an English literature degree, and I've never done any marketing whatsoever. There's something that everyone can find out, and they'll find their niche. And like we said at the beginning, it's actually a massive discipline. It goes all the way from really technical stuff to, you know, really kind of fluffy ideas, marketing, you know, graphic designy type things.
And I think the thing with digital is it is such a weird midpoint, and it completely depends. Even when you speak to people in the industry, everyone has a different idea of it. Some people will say we are part of marketing, and it's marketing led, and we're there to speak to the customers or the prospects, or it's quite technical. And I think if you look, we are, because of that midpoint, we are further on. If you look at a room full of developers or engineers, there's one woman in there. if you look in digital, there might be now looking at 30% women. So, you know, we are further on, but I do think it's because of that marketing link.
Yeah.
And it's just down to kind of whether people see it as marketing or is it engineering and technical.
Stacey, what do you think?
I think some of it does come down to job descriptions. I think if you describe something as very techie and you play to skills that tend to sit more with men, then you're going to get more male applicants. We'll tend to do job applications where we're saying, actually, we don't care what experience you've got. We want someone who's good at writing. So if you're good at writing, actually, naturally, you're probably going to be quite good at keyword research because you'll have an inherent understanding of how people use language. If it's something more on the technical side, then obviously you've got to advertise it with technical skills. But I think some of it sits outside of the scope of SEO and what we can do. And it's more like it does come back to school and education. But I think just by dropping how we describe things as technical or dropping things like you need a computer science degree and saying actually you need to be good at writing. I want someone who's really good at communicating. It's like account managers. Probably doesn't really matter what degree an account manager's got. They just need to be shit hot at talking to people and conveying things in a really clear, simple way. And it's communication skills. It's not a degree in anything. So I think simplifying job descriptions.
Yeah, when we were recruiting an SEO copywriter, we were saying, you know, you just need to be able to do the basic writing. The SEO bit we can teach. You know, that all of that, everything else you can learn, how to upload it, how to optimize it, what to do with it afterwards, all of that we can teach. You just need a little bit of a nugget of being able to write something. And if you can do that, you know, you can learn everything else. And it's the same with all, you know, I didn't learn any of this. I've learned all of this by doing it and by just taking the plunge and thinking like, right, I need to learn how to do SEO. All right, bloody hell, let's crack on with it. And so if I can learn it, anyone can learn it. You know, it's about finding the thing that you're passionate about that'll then drive the rest of the learning, isn't it? Again, time is marching on. There's two questions we've just had a couple of comments actually, which I really want to. Susan Wood said that you know, obviously we're all going to fail, and there's always going to be a point at which you fail and that you pick yourself up and that you recover. And I do actually, you know, obviously I massively agree with that. But again, I think that's something that we have to get better at conveying. And I think women are particularly better at that. You know, men, and again, sweeping generalizations, the men that I know never seem very keen to admit when they are wrong and to say like, oh shit, I ballsed that up, you know, my fault, let's put it better. Whereas women that I work with and, you know, that I work with within the business and without the business, seem to be a lot more able to say, all right, no, we got that wrong. Or actually, we've started doing this, but I've changed my mind and I think let's go somewhere else and let's do something else. And I do think that's a particularly sort of uniquely female perspective and something we need to get better at shouting about, that yeah, absolutely, it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail as long as you pick yourself up and you keep going and you crack on. So yeah, thank you for that, Susan. Two questions I want to ask both of you. Anneka, I'll come to you first. If somebody wanted to continue this conversation with you now after this session, are there any apps, resources, books, anything that you've read that you would point people to carry on doing a bit of learning?
To be honest, I think that this is an area I need to get better at. I mean, even in the chat we've had before the session today, you guys have all mentioned various books which I've written down, and I need to go off and read more into it. I've got bookshelves full of them because the books have really good intentions. Of course, that sounds really interesting. I've not actually read.
Yeah, I mean, but that's it. It is absolutely. It's a learning curve for everybody. It's a continual learning process, isn't it? But yeah, it is something we all need to. And we were talking, in fact, before we came on. I do exactly the same thing. I add them all to my Audible library. Whether or not I listen to them is another matter.
Yeah.
So, Stacey, what about you?
I think actually, I mean, I was quite naive about how big an issue it was when I first started, which I don't think is a bad position to be in. I think if you go into a career thinking, so what, you know, it doesn't matter that I'm female, great. But I think being aware of actually how real this sort of world built for men is probably a good start. So Invisible Women's a great book. Any women looking to get into search, there's loads of online communities. You mentioned one, Women in Tech SEO is brilliant. I think just getting into groups where you're speaking to other women at the same level or at levels you want to be at is a great way to go.
That Google do a, and I think this is them partly sort of trying to redress the balance here, but they do a women in search. I think they've got a website about it, but they will promote women in search. So again, it's about joining those communities, isn't it? And starting to make your voice heard. Find them online, find them on Facebook. You go out and seek them and stand up and say, actually, can I join your club? Because I've got something to shout about. You know, you've got to be brave enough to do that, haven't you? So I think, yeah, anybody who wants to do that. Also, I was mentioning a really good book, which now I've completely forgotten about, but it's by Laura Bates, who did the Everyday Sexism Project. It's about online communities that are kind of mainly dominated by men and what they're doing. That's a really good thing that I think people should find out about. And there is a really good TED Talk by Safia Noble, which is called How Biased Are Our Algorithms. That's a really good starting point if you want to find out more about algorithm bias and kind of what it means. Again, so much. I've written down so many things here that I wanted to talk about, and we've completely run out of time. So my last question, I'm going to come to you. What would your top tip be if you were advising a young girl now and she said to you, I want to get into search? What would your top tip to her be? Stacey, I'm coming to you first this time.
So as well as doing your job applications, get yourself a little test site. Actually, we encourage everyone here to have their own little side projects anyway, because if you're not going to be giving the experience on a client or a job to show what you can do it for yourself. Yeah. And then if it's an SEO role, forget your cover letter. On your email, attach your CV and the information you need to do, but your letter is all about, this is the stuff I've done without any help. Yeah, and sort of prove willing and able, I guess, before you give them the chance.
And on that front as well, I know we have, given quite a lot of plugs to the Women in SEO group, or I have at least. But there are quite a few women, and you'll find because there's a lot of girls that are saying, I want to learn how to do anyone got a project that again, put yourself out there, find some SEO communities and say to them, I want to learn how to do this. Please will somebody either give me a one-to-one or let me practice on the website or do it. Yes, you're going to be working for free, but you're getting experience and something that you can then evidence. So that's definitely a good start. Anneka, what about you?
Probably just the same, kind of get yourself out there, make sure you're connecting with people. There's so many amazing women at so many different agencies that, we probably don't see enough, but a little search on LinkedIn, you'll soon find them. You might find people very local to where you are, or, also people you didn't realize what they did. I mean, my dad's been telling people for years that I work for Google, and I give up because I'm like, he's never going to understand I don't work for Google. But there's probably a lot of people out there who are working in these roles that you didn't realize. Getting yourself in, quite similar, but it is a little bit more difficult, obviously, in PPC because you've got to put some money behind it, which kind of complicates things a little bit. But set up an AdWords account or Google Ads account, get in, practice, put a $5 behind it, just practice building stuff. I've mentioned it before on the last session as well, like Google are very good for PPC, because obviously they're making loads of money out of it. Their training is very good. So go on and complete it and go through it all.
That's a very good point, actually. There is an awful lot of free training out there. And it was one of the things I wanted us to come back to was mentoring, and we haven't obviously had time. But you're absolutely right. I don't know a single woman out there who would not offer at least a little bit of advice to the next generation. So yeah, find a woman in search and ask for their advice, and that, they might not be able to practically help you, but at least giving you a few pointers are, always up for that. And I would, I think all of us three would be. So if you are trying to get into search, please feel free to contact us on the chat. Mine would be, just try it, because there are so many disciplines in search, and you will find something that chimes with you and what you love, whether you're mathsy or algorithm driven or processes or words and ideas. Search needs all of that, and it's also all about psychology, and it's all about language, and it's all about communication. There's so much in it, so there will be something that you will love. So have a go, just jump in, and you'll find something, and be brave and do it. So we are massively over time. Thank you so much to all three of you. As ever, please put your details in the chat box if anybody would like to contact you. We will be monitoring the chat afterwards. So if you're watching this not live, if you're watching it later on, again, if you have questions, put them in the chat box. We will happily answer them. And if you want to get in touch and ask us anything about how you get into search, we're always happy to help. And that's it. We're off.